When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain and sat down. His disciples came to him, and then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So if I say the Beatitudes, almost everyone that has even a remote connection with the church will understand that what we're talking about is this passage that I just read. That we're talking about the first 12 verses of the Gospel of Matthew, if you have heard that term. But there is a problem with using the term Beatitudes. Because every time we use that word, we reaffirm an idea that is simply wrong. The Beatitudes are not about our attitudes. They are not a call for us to live these attitudes in our own life. In fact, I've heard it said that we might do a better job by removing the word blessed or blessed to help with this understanding. You see, when we use the word blessed, it perpetuates the idea that we should aspire to, among other things, to be poor in spirit. This is wrong. So I've heard it suggested that instead of using the word blessed or blessed, that we should insert the word honor or honored to get to the heart of what Jesus is trying to preach. So I'm going to do just that right now. I'm going to read it again, yes. So listen with this twist. Jesus saw the crowds. He went up to the mountain and he sat down. His disciples came to him, and then he began to speak, and he taught them, saying, "Honored are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Honored are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Honored are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Honored are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Honored are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Honored are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Honored are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Honored are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And honored are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. The same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Now that might not have the same impact on you that it did with me, replacing blessed with honor, but it does begin to move the message a little bit away from us focusing on our attitudes. It may be subtle, but it's enough to get my attention that something else is going on. You see, this list is not simply about personal qualities or emotions. There is something much deeper at work. To get to the heart of the issue, we have to remember that Jesus lived in a culture that was awash in this concept of honor and shame. You either were honored or you were shamed. This was, in many ways, the glue that held society together. No one wanted to be shamed, and everyone sought honor, and you could control society without ever having to call in the Roman authorities. Those who were honored in the ancient culture were the wealthy, the powerful, and those who could help others. Joy, thanksgiving, material abundance were a sign of God's blessing and honor. And if we stop to think, that sounds probably an awful lot like the way things are today, even if we don't call it honor and shame. I suppose we might call it celebrity and irrelevance. So take for a moment, I'm going to bring this home a little bit and see if you can go with me. You see, some look at the Central West End in St. Louis and think blessing and abundance, hard work, initiative, and entrepreneurial spirit. And other folks might look at northern parts of our city and see shame, waste, ignorance, lack of initiative, and a situation that is mostly the fault of the people who live there. In this social understanding, it somehow just happened by God's hand. Some were chosen for blessing, and others were not. So those who've received the material blessings are truly blessed, and those who have not are actually shamed and cursed. This vision of our city is, at its heart, willed ignorance. It ignores a simple reality. It was created by public policy, not by God's hand. Public policy always dictates where public funds go, tax incentives and such things. And interestingly enough, if we look at our city, where have most of the tax incentives gone? To the place that looks most blessed by God, if we're thinking material abundance. It was true today as much as it was in the time of Jesus. Those who were honored had great palaces in their name, and those who were shamed lived on the margins and were ignored. And then they were blamed for being on the margins when the entire tax system of the ancient world set it up that way. The society had moved from being an agrarian society, where the temple was small, to a situation where all of the funds on the countryside were being funneled to Jerusalem, and great temples were being built on the backs of the poor. And so, in the midst of this mess, it could be Jesus' time or our own mess, he begins by turning the whole world upside down. This way of looking at the world, where those who are well off are blessed, is not so in the eyes of God. In the ancient world and in our own communities, the poor, in spirit and in body, the meek and the mourning and the hungry are cursed, or worse, just simply ignored. We do not provide for basic needs for people. And too many folks believe that when folks suffer, they're getting what they deserve. In fact, we're living in a time where even the basic needs are being taken away and then called good and somehow connected to God. This curse has grown, and God cannot be pleased. And yet, Jesus says those who've been left out are the ones who are honored. There's some incongruence with all of that. So what could it mean? I think what Jesus is doing at the very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount is three things here. He's talking reversal, he's talking reminder, and he is sharing a warning. But before I talk about that, what I want to do is actually take some time and break down the list that we call the Beatitudes. There's actually two sections in that list of four. The first section is about those who will be honored in God's kingdom. And the second section is about human action that the followers of Jesus are called to. Jesus begins by talking about the poor in spirit. For a long time, I did not like this list because in Luke's gospel, he just says poor. It's really clear. The problem is that when we use this term poor in spirit, it doesn't take very long before we can take this passage and then make it refer to the billionaires of the world who are having an existential crisis because they're being demonized by people who are suffering in the streets. Poor in spirit. The text does not support this. And I don't say that very often. So when Jesus says poor in spirit, he's not talking simply about an emotional state that ignores the physical realities. In fact, what he's really talking about is the destitute. Those who are so poor they just have given up. Those folks who simply cannot go on. So they numb themselves, do not believe they will live to see 30. These folks have faced poverty so long that they've given up hope. And God says, in the kingdom of God, they will find hope and renewal, and most importantly, a reversal of the troubles. And that those who have oppressed them will be punished. It's a warning to the privileged. All in that first line. Jesus then goes on to mourn. Now here's the interesting thing. In the Greco-Roman world, mourning was seen as a vice for the poor masses. It was something that those of proper breeding just did not do. It wasn't proper to show emotion. It was a sign of ill breeding. Today, we often get embarrassed or call out people who mourn too much. A certain kind of class of folks just don't fall out. You can, now I'm meddling. God says it's rubbish. It is not a sin to mourn. God says those folks will be honored. Now on to meekness. Just touching on it briefly. When I hear the term meekness, I hope probably like you, think of someone who's gentle and mild and passive and maybe even a little bit like a doormat. But the Greek doesn't support that. Our English word for that does not get to the heart of what's really going on. What Jesus is talking about here are those folks who have no economic or political power. They're meek not by their own emotions, but because society has kicked them to the curb. Those are the ones who've been humiliated in their daily lives for none other reason than just driving while black or something like that. In God's kingdom, those who have been excluded turn out running everything. The meek will inherit, which means they'll own it, not just run it. So this passage, those first 4 parts, were all about God turning the world upside down. All of the honored people in our society aren't mentioned. Not only are the poor lifted up, the oppressed aren't even mentioned. Now think about that for a minute. They don't even get a hearing at this point, but they should be listening. And finally, in this first section, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness refers to those people who have been denied it. You see, the struggle and hunger for justice, well, for those who are comfortable, we may be powerfully committed to the works of justice and righteousness, but the truth is we're not hungry for it in the same way that those who are living it every day. The struggle for justice indeed needs allies at all levels. However, the more comfortable are often the ones who are saying, let's take a measured approach to things. Jesus doesn't mention those, he just says those who are hungry because they've had enough. The struggle for justice is built on that kind of hunger. And Jesus says this hunger will be filled. It is, after all, the expectation God's expectation for the way the world should be. Now on to section 2. After reversing the order of honor and shame in the ancient world, Jesus tells his followers that they are not to follow the ways of empire. When you come into the kingdom of God, don't act like the Pharaohs and the Caesars and the empires of the world. It is too easy to do that. And this is where Jesus moves from to action. And notice, does Jesus nowhere say, check your attitude? He doesn't say, these are the attitudes my followers must have. He doesn't say anything about that. It is about social location and actions. And we are always called to put hands and feet to our words, to our faith. When faced with a world that values domination and humiliation and relishes some bullying, Jesus says, be merciful. That may not tweet very well. In a world that says we should manipulate and focus on our image, Jesus says you need consistency between what's going on outside and what's going on inside. It's central to our identity. After all, our heart can be a place of love or lust, and the fruits of a pure heart are mercy, justice, and peacemaking, and not being hypocritical. This is the path to a more intimate relationship with God. Pure of heart shall see God. It opens up our ability to seek about not being drawn into them, thinking somehow, well, everyone else is doing it, I'll do the same thing. If we want to see God at work in the world, we are called to act in these ways and with these actions. And then, lo and behold, the most radical thing of all that Jesus says is that peacemakers will be called the children of God. Not the peacemaker missiles, by the way. There are actually missiles called peacemakers, in case you didn't know that. In some circles, the Bible might call that heresy or blasphemy. Okay, back to Rome. So in Rome, peace meant peace with bloodshed. It meant peace with boots on the ground. It meant peace through strength and carrying a big stick. The peace of Rome, though, did mean security for some of the world's most vulnerable, but it also meant violence for them as well. God says God's peace is not a peace that will look like anything Rome has offered. God's peace does not come from the crushing of the poor or ignoring them, which I think might be just as bad. God's peace does not sacrifice children in war and call it security. Peace, the peace of Jesus Christ, that stuff we do when we're shaking hands with one another, where sometimes it feels like we're just catching up, is an earth-shattering moment where we are saying no to the ways of war and domination. That's what we're doing. Seriously. It's about being in right relationship with God and one another. But this means the path of peace may not always mean being nice to everyone. You see, to the war makers, to the politicians who hurt others, we must say no. And it might not seem particularly peaceful, but it is the work of peacemaking. To work for peace means to stand up to oppression. It is about calling out politicians and other leaders who take away basic needs from the poor so the rich can have another tax break. You know, sometimes that happens. Now, I said this passage was about a reversal and a reminder and a warning. The reversal, we got it. It's the flattening of the social strata. Those who've been ignored are now honored and have places of honor. The reminder is a call to act differently. We know these things. These are not the first time we've heard this. It's more than twice. We've heard these things before. It's a reminder that we're called to act differently in a world that does not value what we are called to value. So now comes the warning. if you thought you hadn't already got that one. So here we are. This is the heart of it. When we walk in the way of Jesus, when we seek to walk the ways of mercy, when we seek to have an internal and external coherence and authenticity in our lives, when we seek peacemaking, Jesus says, there's a good probability that you will face some pushback, some persecution, and some trouble. Because the truth of the matter is, and forgive the reference, the empire will always strike back. Jesus says, despite all of that we are not alone. We have each other. We have the great cloud of witnesses, the ancestors who have gone before us. And we have the Spirit of God that calls us to proclaim liberty. And in the end, Jesus reminds us not to lose hope, because those who do what is evil in the sight of God and call it good, those who oppress and say it's good public policy, those who crush the poor and then call them lazy, well, the truth is God's going to sort that out. Let those who have ears to hear